When he arrived, Percy was telling Toby a scary story. "Are you still going on about those silly ghost stories?" Thomas asked as he backed down into the sheds.
"I'm telling Toby about a demon train,"
Percy replied. "A demon train? Whatever next?" Thomas laughed. Toby gave an amused sign and rolled his eyes.
"Please continue," he said to Percy.
"No one knows what this engine looks like. The only thing they can make out is the shape of the smoke box,"
Percy continued. Thomas didn't bother listening to the rest and backed further into the shed. "It's all just a bunch of rubbish," he said to himself before he drifted off to sleep. A while later, Thomas opened his eyes. He looked around. The fog seemed to have gotten thicker, making the area around him seem smaller, which made him feel more isolated. Thomas couldn't help but feel something was off. He looked around again, but slowly and more closely. He turned his gaze to the tracks in front of him, and could vaguely make out the shape of an engine's smoke box through the fog. Thomas felt uneasy, especially given that he couldn't make out anything except for the black shape of the smoke box. Thomas eyed it, trying to see if there were any features. He would soon regret it. He was able to make out something. 2 tiny, barely visible white dots where the eyes would be. Thomas stared, wide-eyed and mouth agape at the sight. Then, the engine began to move closer to him. Thomas was now panicking. "Help!" he screamed, but no sound came from his mouth. The engine moved closer. Thomas was frantic. He tried to scream, but he couldn't. He tried to whistle for help, but he couldn't. He tried to reverse, but he couldn't. Nothing Thomas tried was working. It was like he had no control of himself, that he was trapped in his own frame. The specter was now just a few yards away from him. Thomas shut his eyes and prepared for the worst. Thomas waited for what felt like an eternity, but nothing happened. He carefully squinted, then fully opened his eyes. The fog was now not as thick as it was, and the thing he had seen was now gone. "What was that?" Thomas asked quietly before realizing he could talk again. Thomas was glad that he was back in control of himself, but he didn't feel safe. Whatever it was that he saw was probably still out there, still watching him. Thomas didn't dare go back to sleep, too afraid of the specter returning and him not being able to escape.